Ready! Aim! Side cannons! Last week on side cannons, Illyria rushed back to the castle after performing very poorly, trying to heal some of the wounds on these individuals that have found their way into Gambler's Fall. Gambler's Fall, the castle grounds being shaped like a dagger, with the castle down at the hilt end, all the way up at the point of that dagger shape. That's where Gambler's Fall is, and Illyria had to essentially cross the entire grounds of the castle. They tried to do some healing down there. They tried to help when some of Chu's larger pack appears at the castle grounds, wounded and seemingly lost, under threat. They are not the only ones either, because more folks are wandering in through the woods. As Illyria rushes back toward the castle to get more help, Illyria is able to notify Corazon, who tells Brisley, who runs it up the chain, and the headmistress herself, accompanied by a number of beaks, head off into the grounds. And Illyria gets connected back up with Igor. Igor, having been in class, learned a decent bit about the study of runes and the vampire houses. But on this subject of runes, there seems to be some details that Igor didn't know before. Details that may, in fact, help him to identify, potentially, how he died. These runes, they're an old school practice, ways to put magical energies into objects and devices and things, to enchant things, essentially. Many enchantments will sort of, they can hold over time, but they cannot necessarily actively sort of continue to cast spells from the object itself. Nowadays, in our little world here, nowadays, one would simply use artifice for this sort of thing. But in the old days, they would use runes. Runes mean a couple of things. First of all, they have to be your own power. You can't just sort of suck storm energy into a wand. Runes themselves, they have to be the power of the caster themselves, which means that the caster has to be very powerful and very precise. But it means that whoever this rune carver is, they are coming from an old tradition, and as Igor talks to first Professor Barzarand and then later on to Professor Brana, they learn that this rune carver is most likely to be found in the towers, in Rosita's towers. Igor goes off to find Illyria after he hears that they have come back to the castle, but have not really checked in yet. Hearing that there's something going on, Igor runs off to try and find Illyria, and succeeds in doing so. But at that very same moment, a professor that we didn't know before, one of the Advanced Studies Wing professors, Professor Ertrick, suddenly attacks Illyria and nearly gets him. Nearly gets Illyria, but that is when Igor and Professor Brana show up. Professor Brana, being an introductory magic professor, manages to hold her own quite handily, and throughout this fight, Illyria actually manages to get control of some of their lycan abilities for a moment. Not everything, not a full transformation certainly, but for just a moment, Illyria was able to harness some of that lycan power, and between that and Igor's very stealthy attacks and Professor Brana shielding and aiding in this fight, the three of us were able to take down Professor Ertrick. How is Illyria going to feel about this? Because after all, professor died? We'll have to find out. This week on Night School at Vesperale Academy. We once again find ourselves in the dark above the castle. Inside, lights are beginning to dim in anticipation of the rising sun. It's the end of the active day in Castle Vesperale. We descend on figures near the drawbridge. Not on the castle side, but on the other side. The other side of the River Argent. Waiting. They wear white hoods and cloaks and stand stock still. Neither Illyria nor Igor are in sight. We're with someone else. These figures wait until up in the belfry, the very highest point of the castle, we see another figure, also in a white hood and robes. Silvery lines crisscross and describe an intricate pattern in these robes, and the figure puts her hood down to reveal Madame Franzeliska. She's breathing heavily. She looks tired. She waves urgently. Stepping back into the shadows, she suddenly shatters into shadows herself. We've seen vampires do this before, and these shadows suddenly just dart out across the castle grounds, off toward the tip of the dagger, following the River Argent down toward Gambler's Fall. This group of hooded figures at the end of the drawbridge starts forward. They cross the drawbridge, and as they do, we see just how many of them there are. They emerge from the tree line, and by the time we see all of them crossing the bridge, there are 3 dozen individuals, all in these white robes. A few studded within with the very same silver designs in these white robes, and they cross the drawbridge, stand for a moment in front of the wide gate, the wide main gate of Castle Vesperale, before turning and following the wall, entering the castle at Tower Scullaport. These white-clad figures walk the halls of Castle Vesperale. They are led by a very short individual who reveals himself to be a halfling as his hood comes down, an old, wizened halfling. And as he does so, they cross paths with our good friends Illyria and Igor. Spoils in hand, sort of limping back toward the dormitories. And as we come down through one of the spiral staircases, we suddenly spill out into the hallway amongst a crowd of students that are looking in some awe at this small platoon of white-clad figures. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they're here for. But as Illyria emerges first out into the hallway, Igor from behind, just emerging through the doorway, says,
Illyria, can you please try convincing Professor Brunner to heal me? I don't feel very well.
And indeed, after a series of misadventures, but an even longer series of really unfortunate attempts to heal, both from me and to Sojourn here, Igor is looking rough. Igor looks very rough indeed. Now, at this, as Igor says this pretty quietly, it does resonate through the hallway here. It echoes up and down as these figures pass. And as this wizened, bent old halfling walks down the hallway, his hood goes back, and we can see he has got this mandala spinning, intertwining, sort of weaving tattoo in white, much like Madame Franceliska has. As a matter of fact, they look very, very similar, these two tattoos. But this old halfling, he stops at the sound of Igor's voice echoing through this corridor. Stops, turns to Igor, and says,
"Oh, you're not feeling so well, are you? All right, come over here. Let me take a look at you."
Igor, I don't know if you approach or not, but Illyria sort of stands in between this newcomer and their friend Igor. However, suddenly there is a white glow from his eyes, and the with a twist, this individual simply reaches up a hand and holds out a very flat palm toward Igor. As he does so, Igor, you feel a swell within you. You feel yourself, as you have been over the past few days, feeling worse and worse. You feel further and further from life, from the mortal realm. But now you are drawn suddenly to the mouth of that dark cave that you find yourself, slowly receding into over time. You are suddenly drawn forward once again into the mouth of this cave, and in the material world, in this real space, you feel yourself much more vital. The ragged edges of your form that dissolve into mist, and your outline that gets faded and and loose, they suddenly coalesce back together, and you find yourself feeling a lot better. A lot better.
How are you feeling now? Ghosts are a peculiar case, but it's always fun to try something peculiar. All right. Clerics were headed down into the dungeons. That's where they've made space for us. And as far as I hear, we may have some new patients very soon.
He motions to the rest of his group, and many of the hoods start to come down, and Illyria and Igor see a whole host of people with these same white tattoos intertwining their bodies, down arms and fingers, down legs, up their necks, even across their faces and heads. They all match. And as Igor, as you are starting to sort of put the pieces together, you realize that although not necessarily all of House Dahlia has such tattoos, the people who do have tattoos like these are almost always House Dahlia. You've been learning about Duskin and about vampires in your classes with Professor Barzarand, and now you find yourself able to identify this group of 36 folks who have called themselves clerics. They march through the hallways and head down a wide staircase down at the far end of the corridor, continuing on through the castle. Whispers suddenly begin. Vampires? That's a lot of vampires from one place.
I don't know. It seems kind of strange to me, yeah?
Well, I don't know. If they're vampires, I'm a vampire. Doesn't seem that strange.
Yeah, but all of them from House Dahlia. Whispers abound. Illyria, holding this loot that we just picked up, is looking a little shaky. They step away from Igor, having stepped in front of Igor to try and defend him, but then being bypassed altogether. Illyria once again steps away from Igor, and Igor, I think you can see that there is some deep concern in Illyria's eyes. Their hands shake a little bit, holding these supplies, these objects that we retrieved from our recently departed foe, Professor Ertrick.
Igor, I said I was going to learn to control this. I don't think that's what I did. Professor Brunna helped us, but I don't feel well.
And although this is not an entirely uncommon thing to see, as a matter of fact, there are probably others in the hallway right now with the very same thing going on. Illyria has blood on their face. Down the sides of one of their cheeks and down their chin. Again, others in the hallway are in this same condition. Feeding is just a thing that happens here. It's a little bit more common with vampires, but there will frequently be lycan, especially lycan carnivores, that will just sort of show up with blood on their faces. But this is a little different because Illyria wasn't just hunting. Illyria just helped to kill somebody. Illyria gets a few second glances. Not many right now, though, as their reputation has begun to get connected in with the little pack that Chu runs. This is the same night as the earlier menagerie match, and at that point, Illyria kind of made a show of going out to help Chu. Not intentionally, but a show was made nonetheless. And so people are starting to associate them with Chu's little gang. At the very least, they know not to mess with them. But these eyes quickly turn away to follow the last retreating figures of these clerics that are heading down into seemingly lower parts of the castle. Illyria looks kind of wistfully down the hall and says,
"They seem powerful. Do you think if I asked them, they could take this away from me?"
Igor tries to wipe some of the blood off of Illyria's face and largely manages to do so. Their face is a little clearer now, and their eyes, though, still sad, still scared. Igor says,
"We're in this together, yes?"
"Yes, but Maybe. Maybe if we weren't, maybe if I went back to normal, I could help you more. Maybe I could be more useful to you. I can still fight, but I don't have to do this. I don't have to be this way. I could be something different. I could be what I was before, and I wouldn't have to worry about losing control and hurting people. Someone's dead, Igor. And he tried to attack me, but what if I do it again? What if that's not the last time?
Some of the clerics turn back to the hallway, and these very last ones heading down the stairs turn and gently shut the doors behind them.
That was a strange group. I'm worried. I'm worried because I learned how to heal, and I couldn't do it. And yet it's coming to me very quickly. Those claws. My teeth.
They reach up and sort of feel at their mouth where the fangs have almost entirely receded. They look like very human teeth once more. Illyria shudders a little bit and sits down heavily on some of the stairs that we just descended.
I don't want it, Igor. I was excited to feel like I was part of something big. With Chew, with this pack that I'm apparently part of, but I don't like this. I don't like feeling out of control.
Igor, with a heart roll of a 9 versus a 9 and a 10, you've rolled a 2.
Being the way that you are just saved our lives moments ago.
But it nearly killed you. If it weren't for these mysterious strangers, you would still be reeling from that. I'm not safe. I'm not safe to be around. Look at this.
Illyria tries to wipe a little bit of the blood off of some of these objects that we have here, and on this little stairway, sort of out of the way of the main traffic, Igor and Illyria take a look at some of the things that we've collected here. We've got a sort of a little, I imagine kind of a handkerchief, a little silk handkerchief, and laid down upon it are the items that we were able to get from Professor Ertrick. This is sort of a natural instinct of Igor's is, you know, if there is stuff to be had, you better get it because otherwise somebody else will, and this is kind of the only way that you get stuff is off of people, whether you pickpocket them or something else. On this little silk handkerchief are spread the following. A talon knife. Doesn't appear to be anything super special. Simply a very small, short, very hooked knife, but easy to conceal. A very concealable knife. There is a potion, and Illyria pops the cork off of it, trying to scrub some of the blood away from the flask that it's in. They smell it.
It smells like chamomile? Is it tea? It's totally clear.
Hands it off to Igor.
You're going to know more about this than I do.
Illyria continues and picks up a polished hardwood stick.
Oh, grief. It smells like after the rain. It just smells like after the rain. It smells like the ground. Maybe, it smelled like the fields after the rain. Oh, good grief. There is a quill which is simply leaking ink all over the place. It's sitting on top of this silk handkerchief, but is leaking it continuously down through the handkerchief onto the stone below. Next to that, a seashell. This reminds me of home a little bit. It seems like it might be from the Oxbends up north. I've heard there are shells like this in the towers as well, where the river flows through, but this feels like a little bit of home. Strange. And I don't know what this is. It looks like just a lump of clay. Igor, I don't know what these things are, but it's strange that a spy would have them.
Igor, you pull the cork off of this potion and you waft it in front of your nose. Some of this smells very familiar. You definitely get a memory that comes back from your days as an urchin in the gate town of Vesperale, and your days poking around the alchemy shop. There were people who would come in occasionally to get potions that would allow them to move on from an unfortunate romance, sometimes to move on from the loss of someone important. The alchemist generally recommended against this, sometimes fervently so, but was willing to sell if people were insistent on buying. These seem to be potions of forgetting. Now, as this is only a partial success, that is about all I'm going to tell you for right now. I am going to go ahead and mark some progress for you, however, on your identifying the items from Professor Ertrick. But yes, you take a whiff of this potion, and this chamomile smell, this chamomile scent in a clear potion, this is a potion of forgetting. You don't know how exactly it would be put to best use, but you do know that this thing that you have in front of you, they typically don't come cheap. It's hard to have a permanent effect like this. Much more often, the alchemist would recommend, trying to alter the memories in some way. Because, potions of forgetting, there are sort of, short-term, cheap ones, which might cause you to forget for a little while, but to truly forget, those are the powerful ones, and it seems like that's what you've got here. Without necessarily knowing much more about it, you put it back down and examine some of the rest of these items. But as you are doing so, you want to offer Illyria just a small sip to see if it makes them feel better? All right, let's see if they feel better after this. I'm going to make a wits roll. On a hit, I think Illyria probably doesn't, because we don't know what this thing does here. You know what? On a partial success, Illyria takes a whiff.
What? Oh, what is this? Don't shove that in my nose. It's powerful. I'm telling you, this is... All smells have gotten really powerful for me. What is this potion? What does it do?
And I think it's safe to assume that Igor passes on what he knows about it.
Just a small sip. It may help you to forget. It might help you to feel a little better.
And I think Illyria feels weak enough to do this right now. Illyria grabs the bottle, looks shakily at it, uncertain, and then their eyes drift to the hand that holds the bottle itself, and that hand is still smeared with the blood from their face, from these items here, and as such, their brow furrows, and they take a tiny sip of this potion.
How long does it take to work?
I don't know.
Suppose we'll find out.
I'm gonna make a grit check now to see how deeply Illyria gets affected by this.
It doesn't taste like anything. Not even water, it just tastes like nothing. Here, did you make this?
Igor, suddenly there's some confusion in Illyria's eyes as they look at this potion and look at you and look down at this little collection on the handkerchief.
Where's all this blood from? Oh, did I eat something?
They wipe their face clean and sort of drag their tunic up and just wipe their face off. Illyria suddenly looks at you with wide eyes, Igor, and says,
Chew is in the forest. Something's wrong at the water. I came back here to get help. I need a beak.
Illyria stands up and starts looking around pretty frantically, and that is the moment when Brisley comes charging in through the door.
All right, out of the way! Out of the way! No, we gotta get downstairs! Move aside!
Illyria stands up and sort of jumps almost in his way to try and stop him, trying to get his attention, to try and tell him about what's going on. But quickly, Illyria falls silent as Illyria sees he already knows. Following Professor Brisley is Madame Francesca, Orif Barsarand, a number of the other teachers, including sort of not quite making a scene, not really making herself the star of this show. There is Professor Brana toward the back, but interspersed with all of them, wounded. There are humans and elves and orcs. There are halflings, the occasional gnome even, but what appears to be at least 4 dozen people. It is a huge group of people. Many of them are limping. There are men, women, children, people of all genders, people of all ages, suddenly bursting through this doorway here. There is a lot of moaning and shouting, and as they rush on through, Brisley simply pushes Illyria aside. Walking toward the head of this group, leading them down the hallways here, we see Madame Francesca. Madame Francesca is speaking rapidly to the other beaks here, especially to Professor Barzarand, the Bone Man.
We're going to have to get him downstairs to the clerics. They have only just arrived.
We didn't want them here anyway, but looks like they might come in handy after all.
Yes, and we are going to be cordial to them. No, it is not my preference that they are here, but they're going to prove very useful tonight.
They continue to lead these wounded refugees down the hallway here. Many of them have wounds that bleed heavily, and Illyria and Igor see a number of injuries from crossbow bolts etched with runes. They continue and rush off through these doors. Professor Brisley just bursts them open, these same ones that the clerics shut quietly behind them, and this whole caravan follows down into the guts of the castle, down below into almost the dungeons. Illyria looking around, can't see Chu, although there are others from the gang here. Steel is over on the far side of this procession, and is helping an old man to walk. This old man doesn't seem to be cut or bleeding, but does have large bruises over his neck and shoulder. Illyria shouts over across this throng towards Steel and says,
"What happened? Is everything all right? Is Chu okay?"
Yeah, no, Chu's fine. We gotta head down to the clerics. I'm just following here. Chu's...
and he looks up and around and doesn't see Chu, and looks a little concerned.
I don't know. We're gonna have to find her later.
And then he gets swept away in this throng of people wandering down the hallway. As they head downstairs, Illyria continues to look through, but it's impossible to tell who's in this crowd and who isn't.
Igor, I'm going downstairs. I have to find out if Chu is here, and if not, I have to go and help.
Illyria rushes down after this throng of people, moving down into the lower corridors of the castle. Off into a series of dark rooms. On the front of this room, the very sort of the very first larger chamber, there is an iron bar door. Not a wooden door with iron banding, but simply an iron grate. Much like an old dungeon, inside is one larger room with a lot of smaller rooms just off of it. In these smaller rooms, there are rings on the wall and chains that are attached to those rings. There are additional iron gates on the doors. It looks like this at one point was indeed a dungeon. Not just a dungeon, but a large one at that. Rows and rows of cells down 3 different hallways. And it would be dark and gloomy, and I suppose to an average non-Duskin it probably would be, but the torches are lit, and this group of clerics in their white robes and hoods, this group of House Dahlia clerics, they're working feverishly to turn it into something else. There are beds and cots being set up along the walls. The packs that they carry underneath their cloaks are full of equipment, and we see cots made of white silk. We see various people setting up alchemical equipment. There are quite a few that are beginning to glow slightly as their white tattoos give off this sort of faint white light, and their eyes give off that kind of raccoon white glow of when you shine a flashlight at a wild animal. And these step forward toward the group, this throng that is now rushing into the castle. This little halfling, this old halfling, stands up in front, this one who healed Igor, stands in front of the clerics and begins to bark directions at the new people coming in, seemingly not taking orders, but giving orders to everyone, including Madame Francisca, who pauses for just a half second as this halfling barks orders, but then continues, seemingly accepting the situation.
All right, we've got I won't puncture wounds, anything from a crossbow or a longbow. I want all of you over here, off on this far left side. I want slashing wounds, anything bleeding openly, straight down the middle, and on the right. I wish to see anyone with large bruises and broken bones. Go, move.
He turns and starts to give orders to his acolytes, these other clerics that are here, and they nod silently and move off to obey. As they rush these individuals in, it is just bedlam down here in this old dungeon. Illyria is sort of rushing back and forth between little barred rooms. All of the barred gates are swung wide open and latched to the wall so that they don't accidentally shut. Many of them appear rusty as all get out, but still very strong. Gems says, I want to check out those white markings to see if they resemble the runes. You do not recognize any of these markings as anything more than simply sort of white intertwining vine-like tattoos that very much match the ones that Headmistress Franzliska have. It looks like a House Dahlia thing. Not all vampires from House Dahlia have it, but if someone has this, you can. If a vampire has this, it looks like you can guess that they are from House Dahlia. But no, yeah, you don't see any comparison to the runes. It doesn't look. They don't look like they are connected in any significant way. Igor is going to try and hide this potion and the potentially the rest of this stuff here. Partial success here. You were able to, I think, get this stuff, you know, fairly well put away. Some of the stuff is still visible, certainly. But you got the potion and the knife and the this hardwood stick put away. The rest, this quill, the seashell, the lump of clay, you still got them. And if somebody were to look at you closely, it'd be like, what are you doing with that stuff there? That's an odd combination of things to have. But nobody's looking at you closely because of the absolute rush around you. As Igor looks through these tattoos, trying to identify them, trying to see if there's any correlation between them and the runes, it does not seem to be the case. Meanwhile, Illyria is going to look around and try to find Chu. Partial success. Had a lot of those today, which is expected, frankly. Illyria looks feverishly through these folks, trying to, bump people aside, looking for Chu to try and get an update on what happened out in the forest. With a partial success, Illyria does indeed catch up to Chu for just a moment. Chu is standing over an unconscious, very injured man that looks significantly like her. They share many of the same features. Their hair, their eyebrows, their nose are very similar. Illyria rushes up to Chu, who is currently standing over this man who shares many of her features. Illyria says, "Is he all right? What happened? What happened out in the forest?" "Listen, I don't know if I've got time for this right now. We just found them. All of them wandering through the forest. They've been attacked. They've been attacked a lot, it seems like. Some of these people are from way up north. Little villages, little lycan encampments. This wasn't one big attack. This was lots of them. They're driving them down south. Driving them south. Why? I don't know. I don't even know who's responsible. I keep hearing about swordsmen in the forest, but it's not all Luca Brusca." Chu looks into Illyria's eyes and says, "Someone else. It's not just Luca Brusca that wants us out." And Chu grits her teeth for a moment, and a low growl goes up. There are a few others of her gang that sort of perk up at this. You see a few heads just sort of like raise above the crowd here and look over toward Chu. But she calms herself and says, "Whoever did this, we're gonna find them." Grabbing onto Illyria now, Chu essentially is going to try and compel here, but I think this is going to be more about Illyria. Chu grabs onto Illyria and says, "We're going to find them. And when that time comes, when we do find them, when we track them down..." She looks back and forth, gets quiet. "Can I count on you? Can I count on you to help me do what's got to be done?" Illyria nods fervently. Chu pulls Illyria in even closer and whispers in their ear, "I know you're trying to be good. I know you're trying to put together a life for yourself that's not so violent, but
Look at all this around you. Look at this. Look what they're doing. Whatever we have to do next, I don't know. I don't know if you're cut out for it. Don't know if you got the art for it. I'll believe it when I see it.
Chu pushes Illyria away.
When the time comes, I'm gonna need you.
Illyria steps back a little bit, now trapped between what Illyria would like to become and what people are asking Illyria to be. Off on the other side of the room, Igor is still looking up and around, wandering over to talk to certain people, starting with one of these House Dahlia clerics. You catch up with an elf woman who she is hunched over one of these individuals with a crossbow bolt stuck in them. The bolt continues to glow with this ember-colored runes, and knowing what we know now, Igor, about them essentially being runes of sunlight, we start to see why some of these weapons have been so vicious. These are Duskin, and Duskin have a much stronger relationship with the night than they do with the sunshine. As these are lycan, it appears that they have suffered the least from a weapon like this, but it is hurting them nonetheless. And as you approach, this cleric is bent over, wrapping bandages around older wounds, and then now, as you approach, attending to this crossbow bolt still stuck in this individual's arm.
Excuse me, might I ask you what your tattoos signify?
Against matching ones. This individual, seeing that you are a ghost, raises an eyebrow, but she calls you over and asks you, I need you to hold around this wound. Simply hold this, and hands you what appears to be a piece of cloth. When I pull, I need you to push down hard. Pushing down under the wound, you wait, and she begins to twist this this crossbow bolt, which seems like it should be absolutely viciously painful, and yet, although this patient on this little silk cot is groaning, this twisting motion seems to be making him groan less. He is like starting to settle in, and as this twists, it seems to be twisting not the bolt in the body, but just twisting the wood of the bolt itself, and is drawing it up into this much thinner, longer piece that is pulling it out of the wound without dragging anything. It is essentially just sort of like stretched this thing way out so that it's much narrower, and it releases much easier. A surprisingly small amount of blood then soaks into this cloth that Igor is holding onto the wound, and as this procedure goes on, the individual goes ahead and is actually fairly open with you. This elf woman smiles, and within the smile, you can certainly see the vampire teeth.
These are symbols of House Dahlia. We are clerics thereof, and we have achieved a certain rank with the house, as has your headmistress, Madame Francesca. Those from House Dahlia who have dedicated their lives to the house and dedicated themselves not just to wandering around the wilderness or the towers, giving into their blood urges. Those who have dedicated themselves to service in some capacity, those are the ones who are granted the tattoos, and with the tattoos, a lifelong obligation.
As she says this, she grabs onto the towel underneath your hand and moves the cloth quickly aside before wrapping a bandage handily around this thing. And then as this bandage goes around, it starts to soak with a little bit of blood before she puts both hands with her fingers interlaced over the bandage and the wound and turns her eyes up to the ceiling, and they glow, just a very faint moon glow, and as do the tattoos, and as they do so, they take on just a slight reddish tinge before suddenly going pale once more. This sort of moon-colored glow both from the eyes and the tattoos. And when she removes her hands, there's no blood soaked into that bandage anymore.
As vampires, we've got a very particular relationship with blood, especially. For many of us, it will be a lifelong struggle to avoid it, but for some... and she holds up her hand, and on the back of it you can see very intricately detailed white patterns that they're not jagged like your lightning scar, but clearly very deliberate and intentional, sweeping and curling back and forth. Our relationship with blood is one that we choose to accept, one that we choose to embrace, and indeed, once we've done so, we've got a fair amount of utility as healers. Come back down to the dungeon sometime, you'll see what sort of work we do here on a more typical day. Move aside, please.
Igor, you have to sort of jump off to one side as another bed, being carried by another couple of clerics, lands here, and this elf woman continues to tend to this new individual. Meanwhile, the halfling, this very old halfling man, continues to hobble up and down in between these rows of beds, not doing much direct healing, but seemingly directing this operation overall. Igor, what do you do next? You can continue this conversation if you wish. She is, still here. She's still attentive. You helped her out, and she seems to be very willing to talk to you. Igor bends over this patient who you have just helped as the elf moves on to this new patient. This man lying on the table, he's an orc. He's got, narrower shoulders for an orc. He's very tall. He's muscular and appears to have pretty scarred up hands. And then like splinters. It seems like he spends a lot of time in the forest. He has relaxed now that the wounds have been largely healed by the two of you. Against a 2 and an 8, you've got a partial success.
When you were being attacked, did you hear anything? Was there any indication who it might have been? Did they shout anything at you? Slogans or...
The orc man on the table says,
No. I don't... Wait. They were quiet. Strangely quiet. It was nearly silent when the attack began, and most of the shouting was ours. I don't know,
he looks to be in a considerable amount of pain still, and his eyes go a little bit wide.
The blood, they stopped near the wounded and the dead. They stopped there. They wanted the blood.
His eyes go a little bit wide, looking up at the healers, who all seem themselves to be vampires.
No. The blood. They wanted the blood. They were vampires.
And the cleric that has been helping you puts a hand on either side of his head, touching his temples, and he slowly falls back down to his bed, and he's sort of mumbling to himself, but his shout sort of fades into just a quiet mumbling under his breath. The cleric looks at you, Igor, and she goes back to treating this other patient. As you sort of show this dagger to this healer, she looks up briefly and says, "No, I don't think so. This is the puncture area, but possibly over in the blade wound area, over along the center corridor. That seems to be where Wince has set it up." Igor, looking down this hallway, you see that indeed all of these wounds along this side are from some sort of ranged weapon. Lots of arrow wounds and crossbow bolt wounds. You can head off to try and take a look at the this other corridor, but this cleric seems to have indicated no, that doesn't seem consistent with the wounds that we're seeing thus far. Let's jump back over to Illyria for a moment. Illyria is still reeling from this demand from Chu, looking down at this man that shares so many of Chu's features. Illyria says,
I heard you mention a brother. Is this him? Yep, that's him. That's him. And this is why we can't take nothing. Alright? Not from inside, like Javik, and not from the outside, like whoever did this.
This is when Igor, I think, wanders over holding this talon knife, looking up and down these rows here. Let me go ahead and give you a quick wits roll here. Gets you just to a miss. You don't see any wounds that seem consistent with this, Igor. And you also, you know, when you have this knife in hand, you don't see any of these wounded folks seem like they recognize it. You know, nobody sees it and you know, points a shaking finger at you. Nothing like that. Most people seem pretty injured, but even the ones who are sort of with it, they take a look at it and they don't give it a second look. Illyria says,
all right, let's do what we can.
Illyria is a little hesitant because the herbalism went so poorly last time, but Igor, you wanted to try and sort of apply your ghastly side toward potentially doing some healing here. And I think Illyria is going to try and do some herbalism as well. Chu rushes off, and you can see that she and Steel are having a whispered conversation just inside the doorway to this dungeon. Let's make some healing checks. Igor, you are going to have to remanifest first because you are dead empty on it. Let's see how well you do. The lamps glow on the walls here. Lamps that don't seem to have been used for quite some time. They flicker and flare up as they are lit, and more of them are lit, exposing longer and longer hallways. This dungeon must have at one time, back in the ancient days when this castle was built, this dungeon must have been extensive. How this castle would have needed to imprison so many is astounding. As these continue to get lit, the space fills in more and more, and the head healer, this head cleric, who you've heard called Wintz, W-I-N-T-Z, this ancient halfling vampire, he continues to wander up and down, taking big, long swaths all the way through these wounded groups, and gives little points of clarification and instruction to his clerics. As Illyria and Igor try to help out, Igor, you are trying to work with some of these individuals who have had these. I think you sort of like maybe circle back toward the arrow and bolt section here as you try to do your healing, because your abilities kind of come in handy when it comes to sort of reaching into something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get your hands into. That's a partial success. So yeah, you are able to do some helpful activities here. A lot of them involving sort of like reaching in and separating people's auras from runic weapon magic. It's very, very picky work, but there's a strong magical aura around these crossbow bolts. And as such, just to sort of like block that off, to separate that from the auras of the people around it, you were able to do that fairly adeptly. You're learning about it. It's tough, and frankly, you're not able to help everyone. Sometimes the healers will sort of push you aside, but you do what you can to try and help them out. And you learn quite a bit in the process about the process of healing, about the way that you can be involved in it. You see around you there is plenty of alchemy going on here. It appears that there's a strong blend of alchemy and magic that goes into the healing processes of these clerics. Meanwhile, Illyria is going to try and do some herbalism as well. Fantastic. Okay, that is a strong hit. Illyria is working alongside the sort of the cuts department here, as this is where Chu and her brother currently stay. As Chu and Steele sort of finish up their quiet conversation, Steele departs quickly, and then over the course of this time when Igor and Illyria spend healing, after a while, Steele comes back, and he has got other werewolves in tow, and all of them are carrying food. They bring this food in, and although some of the clerics are sort of like pushing them off and pushing them away, Wince is able to direct them over to one side where they start to get sort of some of this food set up. It looks like just sort of doing whatever they can to be helpful, not really knowing what that is. As the day goes on, it is hours and hours later. The sun has well risen at this point, but we are down in the dungeons and protected largely from the sunlight. Through the crumbling roof, the crumbling ceiling of this, some of the masonry has popped away, and we can see that up in some of the classrooms up above, the faint sound of birds are coming in through the windows, which typically means like you should have been well in bed by now, but we work well into the day, and it's exhausting. Over the course of the day, y'all were here first. Chu and Igor and Illyria were here very early on, and you sort of ended up starting to help, whereas most of the rest of the students, we can see, Corzon and Terua even. Terua does get waved in to try and help out, but Corzon is stopped at the door, as are most of the students. They wander past. There's a constant sort of parade of looky-loos peeking in through this door, seeing what's going on. But as we continue on, the first sort of rush, the swell of so many wounded people begins to slow, and Igor, Illyria, Chu, even Steele slump up against the wall. It's now about midday, which means that we've worked well into our sleep cycle, and exhausted, we slump onto one of the cots here, just leaning up against one another for stability, exhausted. It's late, yes, but we've been working hard, and as we do so, as we slump against each other on this cot here, the old head cleric Wince stumbles up toward us. He appears less tired, impossibly, than we are. He's old, very old. He should be exhausted at this point, but he appears just as spry as when he first walked into the castle earlier in the night. He does hold a walking stick now, just a short little thing, gnarled little shillelagh of a walking stick, and he taps toward us and says,
"You children have done an admirable job. You should be proud of the work that you've done here. And now, the next thing that you should do, it's a very important and special mission from the clerics. As the head, I do have the authority to order you. Get yourself a good nap. You're not going to be useful to anybody if you're exhausted."
Igor, you have pretty well exhausted your haunt, helping all of these people. Illyria has, well, just exhausted their person. Chu and Steele have been running all over the place, having no direct way to help out here. They've just been doing a lot of like running and fetching things. They're both exhausted. And I think we just sort of look at each other and nod with a sigh as we start to head out toward the rest of the castle. leaving the hubbub, which has, like I said, largely died down. There are still moans, but not nearly as much screaming. There are still shouts, but they're more occasional now, in favor of simply murmuring orders to the various clerics here. Head cleric Wince continues and struts up and down, explaining things to his various clerics, and the room has gone much quieter. As we near the door, out inside the hallway, which has basically entirely cleared of students, it's the middle of their night, they're all asleep up in the dormitories, and you hear the headmistress talking to a voice that Illyria actually recognizes.
That's the envoy, Rainia. That's the headmistress's sister.
Out in the hallway, we hear this.
And will you not tell me where you are going, Rainia? I had thought that we were going to enjoy your company for a bit longer. At the very least until you completed your investigation into the academy. Yes, and Francesca, you have done well. Things seem to be generally in order here, and that is what I shall report back to House Dahlia, but House Dahlia has sent me off on other business. I probably shouldn't share this with you, but we're going east. We're going to talk to the other houses. Crocata and Calthea.
Madame Francesca gives a noise of exasperation.
Rainia, you know what they are tied up in, and you know that when they get here, if they should get involved, this whole thing is going to get very bloody.
Rainia peeks in through the door to this infirmary and very nearly catches us, but Igor and Illyria, we both duck to the side, and they simply see Steele and Chu arguing a little ways in, and then behind that, this large infirmary full of people very injured, and Rainia says,
Francesca, it's bloody already. This is here, this is inside your castle, and although you may be well equipped to handle all the students here, certainly you are not equipped to handle the students and these refugees and a new wing of your castle dedicated to the clerical healing. That was not my decision. That was an order from the house. I know this, Francesca, but you need help here. This castle is not as isolated as it once was. The blood has found its way through your doors, Francesca. And before long, it will flow into every stone in the castle. Whatever moved all of these people south, it will not stop there. It comes from the north. Lucabruska comes from the towers, and wherever else here in the frontier, we certainly intend to find out. We need help. You need help.
out in the hallway, Madame Francesca is silent. So Rainia pipes up again and simply says,
I will be back in a few days. Perhaps a week. If I'm not, please tell the clerics to send additional personnel to the Crocata and Calthea territories. I'll see you in a week.
Madame Francesca still says nothing as the double footsteps of the envoy Rainia from House Dahlia, Francesca's sister, head off down the hallway, accompanied by her bodyguard Dunley. Igor and Illyria quietly slip out, trying to look inconspicuous. Chu and Steele doing that thing where, because they're so focused on something else, they just follow wherever the group is leading. Igor and Illyria head up and into the rest of the castle. It's far past midday now, and we have to dodge from window to window, especially you, Igor, as standing in direct sunlight is very uncomfortable, unless we're in those rooms that have been fitted with shadow glass. Illyria Chew and Steel have less of a hard time with it, but we're definitely feeling the effects of exhaustion. As we approach our dormitory, I think we change paths from Steel as he gives Chew kind of a nudge toward Illyria and just sort of like jerks his head at her. Chew grits her teeth a little bit, comes back over to Illyria and says,
I'm not sorry for what I said earlier, but I'm sorry for how I said it. This crew ain't always easy to look out for. And today I had nothing I could do. Just running elk legs and deer haunches down to the infirmary. That was all I could do. We train, we try to get better at what we are, and then something like this comes along and it all meant nothing. I'm gonna need your help. I'm gonna need you, Illyria.
and she follows Steel up toward their dorm. Illyria and Igor continue into our dormitory. We're quiet because everyone is pretty well sleeping here. The enormous, very heavy curtains, patched and scuffed and rotten as they are, they do a good job of blocking out the sunlight entirely. And we crawl into bed. But as we do, there's a crunch, like dry leaves. And Igor, you lean over to find underneath your bed, there's a little roll of parchment. Igor, what is that? You unfurl it, and it says the following. Dear Diary, House Dahlia is in the castle. My end is near. Professor or not, they will find me guilty for what I've done. It got a companion killed by Lucabruska, and now I'm hunted through the halls of my own school. This is the end for me. Folks, I thank you very much for joining me. Cutting it a little short today because my internet is clearly complaining. Clearly has an awful lot to say. Folks, thank you very, very much for being here. A quick rundown through some of the loot that we've got, and then we're going to talk about our quests that we've currently got, and I guess a tiny spot of review for what all happened in today's episode. Illyria and Igor, after the encounter with the Lucabruska spy, and not only that, but the Lucabruska spy who died and the House Dahlia spy, Professor Brana, who are both here, and after this encounter, they head off and try to identify some of this loot. We have got a talon knife, which appears, the special thing about that is it's essentially just very concealable. There is a clear smelling, a clear potion. It smells like chamomile. A potion of forgetting. You don't know all the details about it, but you're able to kind of half identify it. A polished hardwood stick smelling of petrichor, a very messy quill, a seashell, and a lump of clay. You're still working on some of the rest of those things. Maybe when we're not exhausted, we can sort of do more investigation into that. The first thing that we encounter as we are trying to sort of investigate what we've got here, there is this group of clerics that enters the castle, like 3 dozen of them, and they head off into some of the lower parts of the castle, into an old dungeon where they are setting up what appears to be an infirmary, which is handy because at this very same time, a huge wave of wounded and exhausted refugees, they seem to be all lycan of some capacity. Many of them werewolves, but all sorts of lycan, pushed down from the north, where they lived in the forest in little villages, pushed down by some terrible threat who at least one of them says it was vampires. Now, vampires from the north is very strange because vampire territory is to the south. Meanwhile, Illyria, Igor is able to get some information about these tattoos. It seems that these white tattoos of House Dahlia, the white tattoos are signs of rank, essentially. But they are part of a covenant that certain vampires take, certain House Dahlia vampires take to dedicate to essentially lives of service. These clerics, because of their relationship with blood already, if they embrace that relationship, they have got some ability to heal beyond what others can do. And so this group of clerics, they are all vampire healers from House Dahlia. So these white tattoos on House Dahlia vampires, they are indicators that they are like relatively high ranking, not super high necessarily, but sort of like mid and upward. But they're people who have made like arcane vows to dedicate to this to some sort of service. For the clerics, it's healing. For others, who knows what it might be. But meanwhile, Illyria and Chu are having a quiet conversation, and Chu insists that when the time comes, she's going to need Illyria to join up with the pack in whatever they have to do to get even for what happened here. Finally, at the end of this episode, Illyria and Igor caught sort of the whispers of conversation just outside the door here. Rania and Franceliska talking together. Envoy Rania from House Dahlia says that they are going to get some other vampire houses involved. She's heading east to House Crocata and House Calthea. Madame Franceliska says, if we get them involved, it's going to get bloody. And Rania simply responds, it looks pretty bloody already. And so she departs. And finally, at the very end of this episode, Igor found another Dear Diary note. Let's talk vows. Igor, let's take a look. Identify the items from Professor Urtrick, the Luca Brusca spy. I have given you 2 progress on that one out of 10. And that is sort of like reflective of what you've got in your hands here, what you've identified so far. You're just going to be able to keep advancing that. I've already marked those, so you've got the XP from that today. Never you fear. Next, avenge your own death. That is a 4-star quest. You're at 1 progress, almost 2 progress on that one out of 10. A 2-star quest, make a good impression on Pinelli. You were at about 1.5 on that one. 1.5 out of 10. And then finally, a 3-star quest to pursue academics. Now, do any of these seem like important things that we covered today? Do we think that we got any XP for these today? Well, y'all are putting that in chat. Let's talk about Illyria's return to Blackwater, ready to settle down. Because it's so hard, I'm trying to be pretty generous here. So yes, I'm going to give myself another tick. Each tick is 1/4 of a full mark, and it takes 10 marks to fill it all the way up. So there's that. Study under a lycan mentor. Now, in this one, I mean, I think I am actually going to give myself a bit of progress here because now she's sort of Chu is sort of acting in that capacity. Xander, don't worry, you don't have to. I know, like today, if you had other stuff going on today, and that's quite all right. Never you fear. To discover the truth of the underbrush. Definitely not. I may abandon that one because I've made so little progress. I don't know. It just seems like a hard one to investigate right now. Protect Professor Brana's secret as a House Dahlia spy. I don't think I've made any progress on that one yet. I don't think anything happened relevant to that right now. And then finally, pursue expeditioneering, which I feel fairly confident I have not pursued, but hopefully soon. Fingers crossed soon. You know, hopefully I can, you know, because of my service here in the infirmary, I can hopefully convince Corzone to take me off of his shit list. I can hope so. Folks, thank you very much for joining me today. I think we shall continue to investigate. I'm going to put right now, right at this very moment, I'm going to put the list of loot from Professor Ertrick over in Discord. There we go. It's over in Discord right now, and I will continue right now to explain some of the details about those, but my internet is on its way down. I can hear the sounds of the engines.